Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail C. Martin, and tonight we are talking about the Gamble years, those years when Sara Gamble took over as showrunner after Eric Kripke departed. But before we launch into all that good stuff, let's let our panelist introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes. I've been a Supernatural fan since season 3. I started writing fanfic in 2012. And I'm also the co-host of the podcast, So Get This, the Lore of Supernatural Fanfiction.
And I'm Gail C. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I fell in love with the show halfway through season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in time for the start of season 12, and have been closing in on the title of obsessed fan ever since. So the Gamble years are 6 and 7. And we got some really good episodes and some that might be a little questionable. Let's start with our favorites. Let's just go back and forth trading one at a time, and then we'll get to the ones that maybe aren't quite as much of a favorite. Even in the bestest show ever, there were some that were but let's start with the ones we love. Carole, start us off with a good one.
When I went to start looking up about the Sara Gamble years, which are really pretty familiar to me because I've watched 6 and 7 quite a bit. I was really struck by the ones that she wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking back actually in the Kripke years at the ones she wrote, and you can see what a strong writer she was.
Mm-hmm.
She had a great grasp of the characters. Like, she was really good on, Sam's voice, Dean's voice, the relationship between the brothers, the world in which they worked. And, it just really solid episodes and everything. That being said, even she wrote 3 episodes in season 6 and 4 in season 7. In season 6, I have to say, probably my favorite one of the 3 she wrote, which is Exile on Main Street, the season opener, Appointment in Samara, which is the mid-season finale, and the second to last episode of the season, Let It Bleed. I probably would pick Appointment in Samara. It's really interestingly crafted, where Dean is trying to strike a bargain with death for death to restore Sam's soul, which is this, of course, one of the major story arcs in season 6. Death makes him wear his ring for a day, and Dean thinks this is going to be a piece of cake. Sweet summer child that he is. We have to remember that we still have a somewhat idealistic Dean here. He's been around a bit. He's been knocked around a bit, but we're not talking about Dean of the latter years where he's really kind of bitter and, is losing his faith. Here, Dean is still very much, the forces of good can still prevail. And hey, they stopped the world from, exploding and caught Lucifer in the cage and all this kind of stuff. And he ends up realizing that it's not a piece of cake, and the decisions that have to be made and the actions that have to be carried through can be very, very painful. He lets a little girl live, which, hey, who wouldn't, And yet, because of that, there is a domino effect of other people then who shouldn't have died, who die or suffer consequences. And it's just this whole little chain of dominoes falling over, and then death has to step back in and fix things. And Dean realizes how important it is sometimes to let people die as much as you don't want them to. And and that the need, very much the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Mhm.
And it's tough for him to learn that. And not only that, he knows that since he messed up, he's not getting Sam's soul back. And so on
Mhm.
top of the lesson he's learned and the pain of it, he has failed. And he's failed at what is his most important job, fixing Sam. And then, of course, death still does it. He's like, you learned what you needed to learn, and you guys have work to do, and puts Sam's soul back in him.
Mhm.
Running alongside this whole thing with Dean and death is Sam decides, because he's soulless, and so he decides he doesn't want his soul back because he's soulless, and he doesn't feel he has a need for it. And so he's busy pursuing a course of action to let his body be so besmirched by like original sin kind of stuff that the soul wouldn't want to come back. And as awful as that seems, there's actually kind of a little comical aspect to this where Sam's like trying to find out what he can do, and he's gonna ultimately he's gonna kill Bobby. And of course he doesn't. But as serious and intense as Dean's story is, Sam's, despite him wanting to kill Bobby, is almost a little more lighthearted and kind of balances it out. Um, and in the end, we have the resolution that Sam has his soul back, and ostensibly everything is right with the world, at least certainly for Dean at this point, because that's all he wanted. And there's just so much going on in this episode. But again, Dean's voice, very clear. Dean is focused on doing the right thing, justice, and in his own compassion, which is a little bit of a rough compassion, but there. And the contrast of Sam, who's normally the compassionate one, being the one who's like, whatever, I don't care, don't burden me down with that soul because I like things the way they are. And she just handles all of that so deftly. So big kudos to her on the writing. Um, and that's really her biggest strength, I think, for throughout these two seasons, is the views she had as a writer influencing her decisions as a showrunner.
Mm. Yeah, you make some great points there. I'm going to go back to the first episode of season 6, which is Exile on Main Street. And this is where we get to see Dean essentially cosplaying suburbia. Now, we've seen regular people cosplaying hunters when we were in the episode with the Supernatural convention. But here, Dean is stepping into something that he only knows from a distance. He was a kid when Mary died and they went on the road with his dad. Yeah, they've squatted in some houses, maybe they short-term rented some houses, but he doesn't have a clue about what it's like to live in a nice suburban neighborhood where you see the same people who are usually not armed or trying to kill you or possessed, where your neighbors expect you to say hello and bring a pie over and invite you for drinks at the pool. He is completely out of his element. Shoot a werewolf? Sure. Stop a vampire? Of course. We've been invited over to the Masons for bridge. What the hell do I do with this? So it's and kudos to Jensen for playing that fish out of water so well. He's trying. I mean, he is living out his fantasies here, mowing the yard, and doing all the things that he thinks good suburban men do. And he gets a job as a mechanic, and he's trying. He is trying, but Sam's not there. And so it's never going to be okay. And he really has no idea, besides watching TV, what actually happens day to day in suburbia. So you have Lisa and she's trying to be patient. She's trying to love him out of this, but that's a tall order. And she's a good woman and she cares about him. But, you know, she's also got a son to take care of. And Dean's pretty messed up. He's putting on a good face, but you know, this is a lot, even compared to, you know, guys who go to war and come home to a suburban neighborhood, or people who have a traumatic incident, one incident, not every week incident. So I think that she did a great job of all those conflicting energies going on here, trying to do the right thing, all the things that pull you away from doing the right thing, being completely unaware of what your role is. You don't know how to play this script. And so I think Jensen did a great job. The writers, you know, did a great job. It's a terrific episode to start season 6 off with. And then, you know, we get that ominous shot at the end where you see this nice lit up house from the street, and there's Sam. What the hell? Great way to set up the rest of the season. So I think that's a real strong start.
Well, he actually interacts with Sam because Sam's the one who saves him from the Jin's hallucinations. That shot of Sam on the street is actually where we ended off on season 5.
Oh, you're right. You're
where
right.
We think he's in the pit, but then we see him standing on the street outside Lisa's house and are left with, what the heck was that all about
Yeah.
for 3 months as we wait for the season to come back because
You're right.
it wasn't streaming. So we have Sam coming back. And I think, yeah, everything Dean knows is only from what he's seen on TV or when he was a kid in the classroom and he saw his classmates' families doing, you know, so he's only got scraps of how to do this. And I think one of the best things is that at least Lisa knows where he's coming from. Lisa knows what he did. She understands the background of where he's coming from. So at least he doesn't have to pretend to her. You know, if he's having a rough day, she can look at him and say, you're having a rough day. And she gets it. So that's at least something. Of course, Ben kind of knows too, because he went through something, but you know, I think those are the most relaxed moments we see Dean have is when he's with Ben, you know, because he doesn't have to really kind of do anything except show Ben how to fix a truck and stuff like that. There's, you know, with Lisa, you get the sense of his kind of conflicted priorities because he loves Lisa and he's trying to make this life with Lisa like he promised Sam he would, but it's not truly where his heart is. And so that makes it, you know, all the more difficult for him. But yeah, a great launching. And we know right away that something's got to be a little off with Sam because why would he wait all that time before contacting Dean? That's not like the Sam we know. The Sam we know would have let Dean know right away. So something right away we have in the back of our heads is off.
Right.
And of course, it's going to take us several episodes to find out what that is. And that is such, you know, that's half of season 6 is Sam is soulless, us gradually deducing it, you know, the bits and pieces, that sensation of being off solidified, of course, in that pivotal moment in Live Free or Try Hard, where Dean is turned. You know, now that's not one that Sara wrote, but this is in that arc that she designed where, you know, for that split second, Sam is like clinically interested in seeing what's going to happen here. Will the vampire bite Dean? Will Dean be turned? And he kind of is like, you know, let's get the 2 spiders in the jar and see what happens, you know. And we're like, whoa, this is not right. Something's really wrong with him. And we finally, of course, find out it's his whole business of being soulless. And that was just, I know it was hard for Jensen and Jared to play. They've both talked about it frequently in interviews that it was, well, for Jared, I think it was more like, "Ooh, I have a new toy."
Mhm,
But for Jensen, he didn't have any of the comfort of the way Sam and Dean worked together. He was
mhm,
working with a whole new character, and he didn't like it.
mhm,
But I think it was a really interesting way to kick off the fact that that 5 years we just had is over, and we
mhm,
are moving into new territory, and that establishes that with a bang. "Hey,
mhm.
let's do it that Sam doesn't have a soul. We're in a whole new world now."
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the other things that was handled well and very interesting that was introduced in season 6 was the whole issue of Ben. Now, on one hand, Dean might not know, squat about living in suburbia, but he did raise Sam. So he knows about little boys, and this is going to be a comfort thing for him, is that he knows how to be maybe not a dad, but at least a big brother to Ben. And that's going to be probably more comfort to him than it is to Ben. He needs Ben. Ben is a touch point. I think that we may all have different headcanons on whether or not Ben is actually his son, but I think the show made a good decision in leaving that ambiguous. Lisa, of course, says it isn't, because we wouldn't be as okay with Dean riding off into the sunset with Sam when they finally do get together if she had confirmed that she really does, it really is Dean's boy. And so by leaving that ambiguous, we can have all the headcanon discussions we want. But it left the path open for Dean not to be a bad father by going back to doing what he does and the show not ending in suburbia. So I think it had to be left that way, although they certainly did play up a lot of parallels to give you the suggestion
Mhm,
that
mhm,
maybe Lisa lied.
yeah.
And you can't
It's
blame
a
her.
oh,
You can't blame her because here's this guy who's pretty much a wild card. He's a vagabond. Um, she may be able to deal with, maybe he'll stay, maybe he won't. But if
he
she is
doesn't wanna put that on Ben.
right, if it's true and if she admits that, then it gets Ben's expectations up. And I think she rightfully realizes that Dean's never going to be the, sitcom dad that Ben might wish for. So
Mhm,
I think that was a smart move.
mhm. And when you talk about, headcanon and stuff, this whole, uh, Dean with Lisa in Suburbia, was a real launch point for fanon. And, many, many, many fanfic stories like to play with other scenarios of Dean being in that situation. Maybe he was there longer before Sam came back or whatever. Um, what other scenarios of when Sam came back, what happened? I mean, here ultimately, he does a couple of things. Lisa first says, "Well, no one says you can't come home and, you know, have a good cooked meal at the end of a hunt," kind of thing. But then even she realizes that's not going to work. They can't do this. It's one or the other, and lets him go. But there's a million ways that scenario
Mhm,
can play out. And fan fiction just does a terrific job. That's one of those really focal point areas where you start with this one little point and yet can have so many divergent paths uh, with that. And much like along the lines of what is and what would never, what will never, what can never be. Where
mhm.
we have Dean in this idyllic suburban with the life, he has his family and everything, and that opened a whole wave of stuff. And that this is very similar to that, where we just had a whole bunch of brand new scenarios that could get experimented with and played with.
Well, and Supernatural loves its mirror images. And I think we see something very similar in season 9 when Sam has to make the decision about Amelia and Dean has to make the decision about Benny, and they choose to walk away and be with each other. So it's just kind of all right. Dean left Dean left the girl in this one. Sam leaves the girl in the next one. Um, so I love the way Supernatural does that.
Mhm.
Something that kind of stuck out to me in season 6, even though these weren't all written by Sarah, there are a lot of trying on other faces and personas in the list of episodes. You have Sam working with Samuel. You have The French Mistake, where Sam and Dean get pulled into another reality where they are Jared and Jensen playing Sam and Dean. Um, you have them getting stuck on the Titanic and getting sent to the Old West. So there's, and then you have, Castiel being somebody else. And Dean thinking he's a dog. You know, lots of things to try on. But I think that whole identity thing comes around over and over again. Who are we? Who am I? Who might I have been? Do I still want to be something else? Or when push comes to shove, am I actually okay with who I am, who we are, even though God knows it's not perfect? And I think that's a really interesting theme
Mhm.
that runs through season 6.
And it's really interesting also because in the first 5 seasons were completely, uh, growing from, of course, just getting to know the boys and stuff, but of the very central focus of we have to keep Lucifer from rising. And everything was focused to that end. And they did it. They kept him from, or he rose a little bit, but they kept him and caged him again and stuff. And as one does after some kind of, you know, epic accomplishment or anything, that and everything's calm for a minute. And that's when you sit back and start thinking those things. Now that I have done that, that was my raison d'etre for so long. I've accomplished it. Who am I now? What
Mm-hmm.
do I do now? Um, for women, it's they've raised their children and the children go out, and the woman is then like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not just a mom anymore. Who am I? There's this questioning. And I think that's what we're seeing here in this part of season 6, where, you know, we defeated Lucifer. Yay, us. But who are we now? And what do we do now? Where do we go from that?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also interesting the many different ways that Supernatural plays with the idea of family. Because, oh, look, Grandpa's back. Good. Maybe
Not
not.
so much.
Um,
Those
and
cousins, nah.
and it's Grandpa Campbell who is the weirdo. Mary's dad, not Henry Winchester. So we get a really interesting perspective on, pretty much up till now, we had the impression that John and Mary were the nice, typical, normal American family until tragedy struck and John went off the deep end. But no. Um, and so that also kind of turns what we thought we knew upside down to go, wait. Um, I've got to recalibrate everything I thought I knew. And I love when a show does that and can pull it off.
Yeah. We end season 6 with second to last season 6 is also then Sarah's Let It Bleed. And I liked this one. So this is where it's so intricate. I'm reading the recap, and I
Mm-hmm.
always write my own little 2 or 3 line recaps so that I can refer to it as we have these discussions and I get the details straight. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm going to have to write a freaking paragraph because there's so much going on in this episode. Um, and it's really great to see because that's something Kripke always did really well too, where it's not just like here's the story and here's the side story. It's like let's have this thread and then we'll have this thread and then we're going to weave this thing and then we're going to rip the thread out. I loved the whole references to Lovecraft because I love when like horror draws on its horror background and the broader mythology of things. And while Lovecraft personally may not have been a great person, I do love his work and his stories and everything. So having that whole Lovecraft angle in there was really cool. And they have to track down the boy who was the maid's son because he saw what happened at the dinner party and all of that. I liked that because that's almost this whole little mystery angle. And then it gets deeply personal. Crowley's in there doing Crowley stuff, which is he's all about Crowley at this point. There's none of this down the pike. Crowley is like a frenemy. This is just Crowley is like out for Crowley, and everyone else be damned. And he kidnaps Ben and Lisa to force Dean's hand, and then we really see Dean torn on the twin pillars of his responsibility, like to the world, you know, and his personal responsibility to Ben and Lisa, who have only been brought into this because of him. This is all on him. If they didn't know him, he hadn't been with them, they would be footloose and fancy free, not being held in some terrible. I think they used the same place they used for Asylum, didn't they? For this, where
They might have,
you know, this derelict, desolate place, building, where first Crowley tries to open the gate, and then Castiel tries to open the gate, and Ben and Lisa are collateral damage. And we see Dean really suffering with the pain of that, as well as like, well, I've got to keep this gate from opening because it's purgatory, and you know, who knows what's going to happen. So she takes a lot of really intricate threads and weaves them together in a really masterful way.
Well, and then the last episode of season 6, The Man Who Knew Too Much, this is where Cass breaks the Great Wall of Sam, as it is referred to. And so he breaks the block that death put in Sam's head to keep him from being overwhelmed by his memories of hell and be functional as a diversion, not to save the world, not to do some really great noble thing, but to keep Dean busy so he can go off and become the new god. And that is so callous. There's some real serious questions that this episode raises about Cass and his relationship to the boys, and understanding at what level he understands that relationship and what value as a celestial being he puts on it. And this is the one I got to ask Jensen and Jared about at a convention, which kind of knocked Jensen a little bit back on his heels, because I asked, you know, do you think Cass broke the Great Wall of Sam to get rid of a rival and have more of Dean's attention on him? And Jensen muttered something like, oh, this is going to be a mess, something to that level, and kind of stalled for time. And I repeated it and rephrased it. And he came up with a very tactful answer, which was, I think Cass would understand that there is no situation in which Sam not being Sam would be good for Dean. Beautiful answer, very tactful. But that's been a persistent question of, yes, in the moment, Cass broke it because he wanted to keep Dean busy over here while he went off and did something else. But was there a rivalry? Was there jealousy?
Yeah, which is all subsequent, of course, to that episode in season 15, 15-18, where Cass reveals finally the depth of his emotion for Dean, and learning that took everything we knew about Cass and turned it on its ear, you know, and so we had to look at things all of a sudden through this new filter, including the breaking of Sam's wall. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and you know, when people come from one culture into another, there are missteps and things they have to learn, and things that might be culturally okay in one setting and not okay in another cultural setting. Coming from angel to human is a pretty big step. And there is a level of unemotional calculus that goes with being an angel, as we've seen them portrayed, that in the straightest line possible, get rid of the rival, uncomplicated by all of the human morality and guilt and other factors that play into that. So it really wasn't an off the wall question when you look at it that way. I understand Jensen's need to be tactful because of the fandoms. But both of the creation people that were manning the line said, great question. You know, I wasn't the only one thinking of it, and you guys were there. I know I wasn't the only one thinking of it. But that was a really interesting way to end season 6. So
And of course, the gate to purgatory is opened, and all of the souls do stream into Cass, and bang, there we are, and we're like, what is this going to mean? He
Godsteel.
declares himself the new god, and boom, end of season. And again, we had to wait, and not only waiting for how the next season's going to start, but not being sure if the season was even going to start at all, because in those years, Supernatural was routinely on the bubble, which meant, it was not a shoo-in for renewal. And this was still one of those years. So we had to wait a couple of months just to find out it was, in fact, coming back. And then another couple of months to see how are they going to move on from that, which they do with, again, Sara writing the first episode of season 1, Meet the New Boss, where they pick up like almost right from the minute of where they left off. Here's my recap of that episode. Castiel is a snotty god. Sam is fractured. Death is pissed. That's my recap for that episode.
And it certainly does make us appreciate many seasons later when Jack declares himself to be a hands-off god. Because we've kind of had enough between Chuck and Godsteel, and of hands-on hasn't worked out too well.
And Castiel's very hands-on because, man, he is going around smiting people left and right. And it's like, hey, here's half a dozen here. Hey, let's off this, these 200, people who purport to be faith-based. And he's like, yeah, no, you're not. And one could sympathize perhaps with his feelings, but his actions were a little dramatic and drastic, and that part didn't go so well.
We also got some questionable episodes like season 7, Time for a Wedding, where Becky kind of roofies Sam into almost marrying her. Now Becky does get a redemption arc over the next 5 seasons, and they could have just sort of left her there as being the crazy obsessed fan stereotype. So I was really very pleased that Becky does get to grow up and get married, and she's still writing fan fiction, but she knows it's not real, and she stands up to Chuck later on. She gets a redemption arc, but man, in this one, she's going to haul Sam to that altar whether he wants to get hitched or not. And
yeah, that's a rough one. That's
a rough one. That one, there are very few Supernatural episodes that didn't age well. That's probably one of the ones that didn't. But then we have Shut Up, Dr. Phil, where we deliciously get, Dawn Stark and Maggie, who are, our besties from Buffy. And we get to see them in a Supernatural episode. And so it's just so self-referential. And when you know the parts they played in Buffy and then seeing them here, even though they don't really reference that, it bleeds over. And Supernatural did that, like when they had Linda Blair.
Yeah, it's not quite meta, but it's meta adjacent.
Right. And
it's winking with you, you know?
yes.
Yeah.
And the episode stands up fine if you never watched Buffy and had no idea who this is, but if you do, it's delicious. So
The mid-season finale in 7 is one of my all-time favorite episodes, and Sarah wrote this one. Episode 10, mid-season finale, Death's Door, where now the Leviathans is the arc here. I know a lot of people don't like the Leviathans. I liked the Leviathans. I thought they were creepy AF. They were a really solid opponent because they didn't know, nobody knew what to do about them. Here they were taking on the personas of people and then eating them. And, Sam, Dean, Bobby, they're all like spinning their wheels going, how do we stop these things? Because nothing works on them. They pick themselves up. They're a Timex, and they keep on ticking. As we follow the Leviathans, we come to find out their whole plan. It's the mastermind behind it is Dick Roman. I love Dick Roman. He is a fabulous big bad. He is tailored and cultured and smarmy and so ruthlessly evil that I just loved him. And I thought James Patrick Stewart just did such a marvelous job portraying him. He has that crest smile, as he's like ready to open those teeth and
he's the soulless corporate guy that we have
totally. He's
all
just
worked
wonderful.
for.
So in Death's Door, we have found out what the plan is, and Sam and Dean and Bobby are trying to get away, and Bobby is shot. And part of the episode is Bobby's in the hospital, and we see Sam and Dean. They're so distraught. I mean, Bobby has been the rock in their lives that their father never was. He's been there for personal things as well as hunting things. You get this Finn and is firmly convinced about how Bobby was the haven for them, the sanctuary that they could come to. And, that whenever John did drop them off there, they were so happy because they would, get to be people. So we've got that going on and we feel their pain. I mean, our hearts are torn out with them. But the majority of the episode is this fabulous trip through Bobby's brain, accompanied by his brother from another Mr. or whatever, Rufus. And love Bobby and Rufus to begin with. Here they are traveling around, and Rufus is kind of like his little guide to where he needs to go, where Bobby needs to go, but he's still Rufus. Oh, he's still gruff and rude and giving Bobby a hard time about stuff. And we get so much of Bobby's backstory, why he always refused to have a child, what it did to his wife, the scenes when he is a young man, and what he had to do to save his mother and himself. And at the same time, there's a Reaper, because he's like, Bob, your time has come and I'm here for you. And Bobby's trying to elude him. So they're running through all these different rooms in Bobby's brain, having all these memories. He's got Rufus, he's got the Reaper. It's, again, all these little intricate threads of, coming together to just create this tapestry of a story. And it's enthralling. And even through all of that, we see how Bobby sees Sam and Dean. And that outside point of view, which is marvelous in so many fanfic stories, down to the final scene, which will pretty much leave you in tears. It leaves me in tears. He's down to his last memory, And it is Sam and Dean getting ready to sit on his couch and watch movies and bickering about movie snacks. And he says, you know, I raised two sons and I raised them to be heroes. And it's
Mhm.
right there. It's just right there.
And
It's
it's
marvelous.
utterly normal. It's not a
Mhm.
moment of saving the world. Hey, we're heroes. It's random Saturday night fighting over chips or taco chips, you know.
Or licorice.
Yeah, very normal. Yeah, yeah, that's a great one. Well, two others, we had some very heavy moments in this season, but we also had two of my favorite comedy ones, which are Plucky Pennywhistle and Party on Garth. Now, for those of us who raised kids in the 90s and spent an inordinate amount of time and money at Chuck E. Cheese, I really understand the whole idea behind, an evil clown. So that felt very normal, and Sam has my full sympathies. That certainly did not help somebody with clown phobia. Um, but even there, it had a lot of humor in it, but it was still a good, scary episode.
Mhm.
Party on Garth, you end up with an invisible monster that you can only see if you're drunk. Uh,
Just so inspired.
uh,
Dean,
and it
Dean
was just
pouring out the Don Julio and going, me likey.
not even getting drunk on Asian liquor. He's getting drunk on tequila. Um, but it was just we get to see Garth being drunk Garth, which
Well,
everybody
he
played,
did have a whole beer.
yeah, a whole beer at once. Um, yeah, it was just a fun episode, but it still had a real monster in it, and they still had consequences, and they had to get rid of the monster. But we got a lot of fun
Mhm,
along the way, and that's one of the things. Pardon me, that I
mhm.
think Supernatural does so well is.
Well, Sarah actually refers to that in an interview where she's talking about working under Kripke,
Mhm,
and then stepping up when he left, and talking about the fact that you can have this dark drama and danger and heartache and bloodshed and everything, but it doesn't mean, as she said, it doesn't mean you can't make a joke about somebody's pie hole.
mhm,
And she really appreciated that and kept, I think, really strongly kept that running for these two seasons where we really always had still that balance of,
mhm,
even in dark moments, we had the, Bobby's dying, but we get to see Sam and Dean bickering about licorice, stuff like that, where eh, that's how life is.
mhm,
You know, I'll tell you what, most of my friends all have very mordant sense of humor. You can be in the emergency room, because somebody's injured and then still like be cracking jokes with them and they're
mhm,
cracking jokes back. So, you know, they she really kept that. She appreciated how Kripke had engendered that into the show, and I think really kept that alive for the two seasons that she helmed.
mhm. No, I agree. Well, we are out of time. I'm sure we could talk even longer about this because there are so many good episodes, but we are out of time. So before we go, tell us where we can find you online.
You can find me on Facebook, especially in the Continual and the Supernatural TFWNC groups. Many, many, many continual panels. And as Ellis Colton, I'm an MM romance author for both contemporary and paranormal romances. And you can find my books on Amazon or wide at Smashwords.
I'm pretty easy to find online at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. If you spell those right, you can find me on all the major social medias. I also do run the Supernatural TFWNC group on Facebook, but most of the time you can find me here on Continual. So thank you so much for being with me tonight, and thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up soon, so we'll see you online.